It was Christmas Eve when I realized that silence can hurt more than words, and that sometimes love hides behind the smallest, strangest things. The snow was falling slow that night, soft and quiet like it didn't want to disturb anyone. My house smelled like pine and old memories. The lights flickered gently against the wooden walls, but inside me, everything felt dim. My hands were shaking a little as I straightened my worn-out sweater, the one my late wife had knitted the last Christmas she was still alive. I could almost hear her humming in the kitchen, feel the warmth that used to fill this place before time turned it into a museum of memories. My son, Daniel, was coming over with his wife and her family. It had been years since he'd spent Christmas here. He'd built a life in the city, a life of shining cars, polished shoes, and dinners that cost more than I earned in a week. I wasn't bitter, not really. I was proud. Or at least I told myself I was. But deep down, there was something cold sitting in my chest that no fireplace could melt. When the doorbell rang, I looked at the tree one last time. The ornaments were the same ones Daniel had helped me hang when he was 6. Back then, he used to say the star on top looked like hope itself. Now, as I opened the door, the light from the outside seemed to wash that memory away. He hugged me, quick and polite, the way people hug strangers they once knew. And then came the gifts. The wrapping paper shimmered under the lights, expensive, elegant. I didn't expect much. I never did. But when he handed me a small box and smiled, I felt that familiar warmth flicker again, like a candle refusing to die. Inside the box was a tie. Old. Faded. I recognized it immediately. It was mine. The one I'd worn to his graduation years ago. I stared at it, trying to understand. Maybe it was a joke, a mistake. Maybe there was some story behind it. But before I could ask, I saw his father-in-law outside, laughing beside a brand-new car. Daniel was handing him the keys. And that's when something broke quietly inside me. That moment wasn't about the car or the tie. It was about the years between those two things, the years of silence, the words we both swallowed, the love that somehow got lost between pride and time. I smiled, of course. That's what fathers do. But that night, under the sound of laughter that wasn't mine, I began to wonder if love could ever come back once it's gone. And before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to this story from tonight? A warm living room? A quiet kitchen? Maybe somewhere far away, alone with your thoughts? Wherever you are, stay with me, because that Christmas Eve changed everything. I kept holding that tie long after everyone had moved to the dining room. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the smell of roasted turkey filled the air, but I was still there in the living room, fingers trembling over a piece of fabric that carried more memories than I was ready to face. It wasn't just a tie, it was a ghost. The color had faded to a dull navy blue, the fabric soft and wrinkled. I'd worn it on his graduation day, the last time I truly felt like I mattered in his life. I remember standing in the crowd that day, my chest swelling with pride as Daniel received his diploma. His mother had been gone only a few months then. I had promised her I'd take care of him, that I'd never let him forget where he came from. And yet, here I was, years later, holding a tie that felt like a message I couldn't read. I placed it on my lap and listened to the voices in the next room. Daniel's laugh was different now, sharper, faster, like it belonged to someone else. His wife, Julia, had a polite, sweet tone when she spoke to me, but I could tell she felt sorry for me. People often do when they meet an old man who lives alone. I didn't blame her. She wasn't here for me, she was here because her husband told her to be. The smell of cinnamon and roasted apples drifted from the kitchen, and for a second, I almost smiled. That was Martha's recipe, my late wife. Daniel had loved her apple pie. He used to sneak spoonfuls of filling before she even baked it, laughing when she caught him. I used to watch them and think, this is happiness. This is forever. But forever doesn't always last. When I walked into the dining room, everyone was already seated. Daniel looked up and smiled faintly, gesturing for me to sit across from him. There was a new watch on his wrist, gold and heavy. The kind of thing that shines even when you're not looking at it. Julia's parents sat beside him, glowing with the warmth of comfort and success. I could almost hear the soft hum of wealth in the way they talked about their vacation home by the lake, their new SUV, their plans for New Year's Eve in Montreal. I sat quietly, eating slowly, pretending the food didn't taste like ash. Then Daniel raised his glass. To family, he said. Everyone echoed, to family. I lifted mine too, though I wasn't sure which family we were toasting anymore. After dinner, Daniel stood up with a bright grin. We have one more surprise, he said, holding up a set of car keys that glimmered under the warm light. He turned to Julia's father. This is for you. Merry Christmas. The room filled with excitement, laughter, applause. Even Julia's mother wiped away a tear. I felt my chest tighten as I watched the man, his new father figure, walk outside to admire the car parked under the snow. A brand new silver Lexus, shining like a promise. And in that moment, I realized something cruel but simple. Sometimes love doesn't vanish, it just changes direction. Daniel walked back inside, still smiling, and for a second, our eyes met. There was a flicker of discomfort there, a tiny spark of guilt. He knew what I was thinking. He knew what I was feeling. But he turned away before I could speak. I wanted to say something, anything. To ask him why. But the words froze somewhere deep inside me, behind years of pride and unspoken disappointments. Instead, I picked up the tie again, ran my thumb over its worn fabric, and said quietly, "Thank you." No one heard it. The night dragged on. The fire crackled in the background, the tree lights blinked like tired eyes. When they finally left, I walked them to the door. Daniel hugged me briefly, just enough to check the box of duty. Then he turned, his arm around Julia, his voice light as he said they'd come back for New Year's if the weather was good. When the door closed, silence settled like dust. I sat back in the armchair by the window. The snow outside glowed under the streetlight, falling soft and endless. I held the tie close, and for some reason, I pressed it against my chest, like a bandage that could stop a wound no one could see. I thought of the first Christmas without Martha. Daniel had been 10. He'd made a paper tie for me that year, with little stars drawn all over it. I'd worn it the whole night, laughing through tears as she took pictures. I remembered telling him that no matter what happened, I'd always wear whatever he gave me with pride. Maybe that was why this hurt so much. It wasn't the tie itself. It was the echo of that promise, now broken by silence. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Midnight. Christmas Day. I stood up, walked to the tree, and placed the tie underneath it. It looked almost peaceful there, folded neatly among the gifts no one had opened. Then I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the tree to keep me company. As I sat back down, I whispered to the empty room, "Merry Christmas, Martha." I did my best. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for him. Not for me. And that was the night I began to remember everything I had forgotten, the years that built this silence, the choices that made my son a stranger, and the love that somehow slipped away like snow melting in the palm of my hand. The next morning, sunlight poured weakly through the curtains, the kind of pale light that makes everything look softer, even sadness. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before I realized it. The tie was still there, folded neatly beside the tree. It almost looked innocent, like it hadn't broken something inside me the night before. I stared at it, wondering how something so small could carry so much weight. Then, without really thinking, I closed my eyes and let the smell of pine and old wood take me back to a time when Christmas still meant laughter, not silence. Back then, our wooden house was smaller, but it was alive. The walls smelled like fresh paint and cinnamon because Martha loved baking the week before Christmas. She said the house had to smell like warmth, or it wasn't Christmas at all. Daniel would run through the hallway, covered in flour, holding spoons like swords, laughing so hard it made my heart ache with joy. Those were the years when life felt light. We didn't have much money, but we had time, and somehow, time made everything richer. I can still see her there, standing by the oven, humming that same tune she always did, the one that got stuck in my head every December. Her hair tied up, cheeks red from the heat, eyes shining like lights on a Christmas tree. She used to say, "One day, Daniel will grow up and bring his own family here. We'll fill this house with grandchildren and too much food." I'd laugh, kiss her cheek, and tell her we had all the time in the world. But time is a thief that never knocks. The first Christmas after she died was the hardest. Daniel was 10, and he refused to talk about her. He'd stare at her picture on the wall and ask when she'd come back, and I didn't know how to answer. I remember sitting with him on the couch that year, both of us wearing our pajamas, the fire crackling softly. He handed me a small box wrapped in red paper. Inside was a paper tie, hand-drawn stars all over it. "It's for you, Dad," he said, smiling through tears. "So you don't have to be sad." I still have that paper tie. It's in a drawer somewhere, faded and fragile. After Martha was gone, I tried to fill the silence with work. Long hours, double shifts, anything that kept my hands busy and my mind quiet. But every hour I spent away built a wall between me and Daniel. He started spending more time at his friends' houses, and when I came home late, he'd already be asleep. The house stopped smelling like cinnamon and started smelling like dust. When Daniel turned 16, he told me he wanted to move to the city someday, to make something of himself. I told him I was proud. I was. But pride has a strange taste, half sweet, half bitter. I knew what he meant, that he didn't want to end up like me. A man in a small wooden house, fixing things no one noticed, loving quietly, losing loudly. There was one night I'll never forget. It was Christmas Eve again, maybe 10 years ago. We'd just finished dinner, just the two of us. I gave him a wristwatch I'd saved months to buy. He opened it, smiled politely, and said, "Thanks, Dad." But the spark wasn't there. I asked him to stay home that night, maybe watch a movie, but he said he had plans with friends. I watched him leave, snow falling on his shoulders, and I remember thinking that it felt like watching a door close for good. That was the same night I started writing letters to Martha. I never sent them anywhere, of course. I just wrote them, sometimes by the fireplace, sometimes in bed when I couldn't sleep. I told her about Daniel, about how he was growing up too fast, about how the house felt smaller without her voice. And sometimes I told her things I couldn't tell him, how I was scared, how I didn't know how to be both father and mother. I wrote one letter every Christmas, like a ritual. And then, one day, I stopped. I guess I thought maybe time had done its job and healed what it could. But last night proved that time doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just hides the wound under layers of routine. I took another sip of my cold coffee and looked at the clock. 10 in the morning. Snow still falling gently outside. Daniel had called early, said they made it home safe, that the roads were clear. His voice was distant, distracted. He said he'd try to come by again soon. That word try, it always feels like an apology before the disappointment. I walked to the small cabinet by the stairs and opened it. Inside, there were old boxes, photo albums, things that used to mean something. I pulled one out, dusty, heavy, tied with a ribbon Martha once used to wrap gifts. When I opened it, a familiar scent filled the air, cinnamon and paper in time. Inside were old ornaments, Daniel's drawings, Christmas cards, and at the very bottom, something I hadn't seen in years, a small velvet box. My heart skipped. I knew exactly what it was before I opened it, the watch. The one I gave Daniel that Christmas he didn't want to stay home. It was still ticking faintly, against all odds. And suddenly, a thought came to me, uninvited and sharp as ice. Maybe I wasn't the only one who'd kept something buried all these years. The house creaked softly, as if it remembered too. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by old things that refused to forget. The past had a way of clinging to this house like the smell of cinnamon, it never truly left. And as I held that old watch in my hand, I realized something simple and cruel. Maybe all these years, I'd been so busy mourning what I lost that I never noticed what I was still losing, my son. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering everything in white, as if the world itself wanted to forget. But I couldn't. Not anymore. That afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about that velvet box and the ticking sound inside it. It was faint, almost hesitant, like time itself was unsure if it wanted to keep moving forward. I placed it on the table beside the old Christmas cards and just stared at it, watching the second hand move in small, stubborn circles. It was the only thing in this house still keeping perfect time. Everything else, my memories, my relationships, my own heart, seemed to run either too slow or too late. The house was quiet except for the wind outside. The floorboards creaked softly as if Martha were still walking down the hallway. I'd forgotten how much silence could sound like company when you wanted it to. I sat there for a long while, just letting the stillness breathe around me. And then I noticed something I hadn't before, beneath the box, a folded envelope, yellowed with age, my handwriting still strong and uneven. It was addressed to Daniel. I froze. The letter must have been there for years. I didn't remember writing it, but as soon as I touched the paper, something inside me recognized it, like shaking hands with a version of myself I'd long buried. I opened it carefully, afraid it might crumble, and began to read. December 24th, 2008. Daniel, I don't know how to talk to you anymore. You're growing up so fast, and I keep making mistakes trying to keep up. I know I've been hard on you. I know I've said things I shouldn't. But I'm proud of you, more than I'll ever be able to say out loud. I bought you something, a small thing, but I want you to have it when you're ready. Maybe not today. Maybe not even soon. But when you look at it, I hope you'll think of all the times I tried to be enough for you, even when I didn't know how. Love, Dad. My throat tightened. I folded the letter and held it against my chest. The watch had been meant to go with it. I had bought it after months of saving, intending to give it to him that Christmas. But we'd fought that morning about something stupid, as always. He said I never listened, that I didn't understand him. I said things I didn't mean. The day ended with him slamming his bedroom door, and I remember standing in the hallway with that box in my hand, too proud and too afraid to try again. I hid it in the cabinet, told myself I'd give it to him later. But later never came. That was the first Christmas I spent alone after he moved out. I ran my fingers over the letter again and laughed softly, bitterly. It was strange how paper could hold more truth than words ever could. I thought about calling him right then, telling him about the watch, about the letter, about everything. But pride is a heavy thing to carry, even when you're old and tired. Instead, I folded the note back into the envelope and placed it on the table beside the tie. The two of them sat there together, one gift given too late, the other given too carelessly. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier this time. The world beyond my window turned white, like a blank page waiting for someone brave enough to write on it. I stood by the glass for a long time, thinking about how many winters had passed since I last felt part of something. And then I heard it, the faint sound of a bell. Not from outside, but from memory. It was the sound of the bell Martha used to hang above the kitchen door. Every Christmas Eve, she'd ring it before dinner and say, "That's the sound of coming home." I closed my eyes and could almost hear her laughter mixing with Daniel's, their voices weaving through the house like music. I could almost smell the cinnamon and the wood smoke, see the fire flickering against her face. When I opened my eyes, the room felt colder. The bell wasn't there. Just the sound of wind pressing against the windows. I walked back to the table, pulled out a chair, and began writing again, not a letter this time, but a few simple lines in the back of that old envelope. "If you ever find this, Daniel, I want you to know I never stopped waiting for you to come home." The ink bled slightly on the paper, the letters trembling under my hand. I wasn't crying, not really, but my eyes burned in that way that happens when the past feels too close. And then, suddenly, my phone buzzed. It startled me, the sound felt out of place in this quiet house. A message from Daniel. Short, casual. "Hey Dad, forgot to thank you again for last night. Julia said she loved your cooking. Hope you're feeling okay. Merry Christmas." I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to write something polite, distant, "I'm fine, son. Merry Christmas to you too." But then I stopped. For the first time in years, I didn't want to answer like a stranger. I wanted to say something real. I wanted to tell him that I missed him, that I was sorry for all the things we never said. But before I could type a word, another message arrived. "By the way, Julia's dad loved the car. Said it was the best Christmas ever." And just like that, the silence returned. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The letter and the tie stared back at me like two ghosts from different times, both whispering the same thing: "Say something before it's too late." I looked around the house, every corner filled with echoes, her laughter, his footsteps, the life we once had. I thought about the people listening to stories like mine, wondering if they'd ever felt the same, the slow, aching distance between love and pride. And maybe, if you're listening to this right now, you've been there too. Maybe you've given the wrong gift, or stayed silent when you should have spoken. So tell me, where are you tonight? Are you sitting by a fire? Driving home through snow? Maybe, just maybe, this story is about you too. Because sometimes, the hardest gifts are the ones we never give. It had been 3 days since Christmas Eve, yet the house still smelled faintly of pine and cold air. I hadn't taken down the tree. I told myself I would, but every time I looked at it, something inside me said not yet. Maybe because taking it down would mean admitting the season was over, that whatever chance there had been to fix things had slipped away with the snow. The letter and the tie still rested on the coffee table. Every morning, I found myself staring at them like two puzzle pieces that didn't fit anymore. One spoke of a love I never managed to show, the other, of a love that had forgotten how to reach me. I thought about calling Daniel again. My thumb hovered over his name on the phone screen, but the memory of that dinner, of his polite smile and careful distance, kept my hand still. Then, that afternoon, something strange happened. Daniel called me first. His voice was tired, soft. He said Julia's parents wanted to invite me for dinner, a small gathering before the year ended. I hesitated. The idea of sitting at a table with the man who had driven away in the new car my son had gifted him made my stomach tighten. But there was also a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, the faint hope that maybe Daniel wanted me there for a reason beyond obligation. So I said yes. I spent hours preparing. I ironed my shirt, brushed my old coat, and even polished my shoes, though the snow would ruin them before I reached the door. The world outside was white and silent as I walked to my truck. The air bit at my face, but I barely felt it. The closer I got, the more the air inside me thickened with nerves. When I arrived, laughter spilled out from the house before I even knocked. It was a warm sound, a sound I hadn't made in years. Daniel opened the door, smiling in that practiced way again, and for a second, I saw the boy he used to be hiding behind the man he had become. Julia welcomed me kindly, her parents greeting me with politeness that felt rehearsed. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was, every word, every smile, every look made me feel smaller. We sat at a long table. The food was beautiful, the kind that takes hours to prepare. There were candles, polished cutlery, glasses that shimmered. I tried to eat, to listen, to blend in. But the laughter around me sounded too far away, as if coming from another room. When Daniel finally spoke to me, asking how I'd been, if the heater at home was working, if I was eating well, it wasn't really conversation. It was courtesy. Then Julia's father raised his glass to Daniel and said, "You've made this family proud, son." The word son echoed inside me like thunder. Daniel smiled, embarrassed, and looked down. My heart squeezed, and for a moment I thought the room might tilt. I forced a smile, lifted my glass, and said nothing. The silence that followed was sharper than any sound I'd ever heard. I don't know how long that silence lasted, maybe just a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. Julia tried to laugh it off, raising her glass again and changing the subject, but the air in the room had already changed. I could feel it pressing on my chest like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. The conversation stumbled after that. Julia's father began telling another story, this one about his new car, how smooth the ride was, how it handled the snow like butter. His words cut deeper than he could ever imagine. I stared at the tablecloth, tracing its pattern with my finger, pretending to listen. Daniel smiled and nodded, though I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes each time they met mine. When dessert came, a chocolate cake that smelled like something Martha would have baked, I couldn't eat. My throat was too tight. The laughter at the table grew louder again, but not for me. It surrounded me, moved past me, as if I were furniture instead of flesh. At one point, Julia asked Daniel to show her father how to adjust the car's settings through an app on his phone. They leaned close together, the glow of the screen reflecting in their faces. The old man chuckled, saying, "You've got the hands of a man who understands things." And all I could think was, when did my son stop being mine? I wanted to leave, but walking away would have felt like surrender. So I sat there, quiet, while the voices blended into a low hum. My thoughts drifted to the small wooden box sitting on my table at home, to the letter I'd written years ago but never gave him. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment to speak, to tell him everything. But when Daniel looked at me again, smiling awkwardly, I couldn't do it. Pride, fear, love, they all fought inside me, and pride won, as it always had. Dinner ended soon after. People began to stand, thank Julia's mother for the meal, gather coats and scarves. Daniel helped his wife clear the table. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling thick and slow. The world beyond that glass looked cleaner than the one inside the room. When it was finally time to leave, Daniel walked me to the door. We stood there, two men connected by blood and distance. He said softly, "Drive safe, Dad." I nodded, forced a smile, and whispered, "I always do." Then I stepped into the cold. The walk to my truck felt endless. My breath came out in short clouds, the air biting my skin. When I got home, the first thing I did was hang my coat and sit down on the old armchair by the tree. The house felt different, not emptier, just quieter, as if the two had witnessed something painful and didn't know how to speak of it. That's when I noticed the tie again, draped over the arm of the chair. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. And then I felt it, something small, folded, inside the pocket on the back of the tie. A piece of paper. I pulled it out carefully. The paper was old, worn at the edges, but the writing was still there, faint, childlike letters that read, "Dad, don't be sad on Christmas. When I grow up, I'll buy you a car so you never have to walk in the snow again." I froze. My eyes blurred, but I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the words that had waited decades to be found. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, I realized that silence had never been my punishment. It had been my choice. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. 2 a.m. I sat in the armchair, the old tie lying across my knees and the small, wrinkled note trembling in my hand. The lamplight was dim, golden, spilling over the paper like memory itself. I read the words again and again, as if they might change, as if time might give them back to me. "Dad, don't be sad on Christmas. When I grow up, I'll buy you a car so you never have to walk in the snow again." The handwriting was crooked, clumsy, the kind only a child could make. But to me, it looked sacred. Those uneven letters carried the warmth of a promise that was never meant to hurt me, yet somehow had. My chest tightened. That little boy, so full of dreams and love, had grown into a man I barely recognized. And yet, maybe the boy had never truly left him. Maybe he'd just been buried under years of pride and distance. I looked out the window. The snow was still falling, slow and soft, glowing under the streetlight. Every flake felt like a piece of the past, floating down just to remind me how much I had missed. I thought about all the Christmases between that note and this night, the dinners we didn't share, the phone calls that ended too soon, the birthdays forgotten. I thought about Martha, about how she would have known what to say. She would have made us both sit down and talk before silence became our language. I ran my thumb over the paper one last time and whispered, "You did keep your promise, son. You bought a car. You just gave it to the wrong man." The words tasted bitter but true. Something inside me began to shift, a realization, quiet but firm. I had spent years waiting for Daniel to come back, to say I'm sorry, to see me again. But maybe it wasn't his turn anymore. Maybe it was mine. I stood up slowly, the floor creaking beneath me. I placed the note back into the pocket of the tie, folded it neatly, and hung it on the mirror. In the reflection, the tie looked almost alive again, swinging slightly in the warm air. For the first time in years, I didn't see just an old man in the mirror, I saw a father who still had one more thing left to do. Morning came pale and quiet. The snow outside had stopped, but the world still looked half asleep, covered in soft light. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching my own breath fog the glass. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me, it invited me. It told me it was time to move. I took out a sheet of paper, the same kind Martha used for her grocery lists, and began to write. My hands shook, but the words came easily this time. "Dear Daniel," I wrote, "I found something last night. A note you once left inside a tie. You were small then, but your promise was big enough to last a lifetime. You said you'd buy me a car so I'd never walk in the snow again. I think what you really meant was that you didn't want me to be alone. And somehow, I let that happen." The letter grew like a confession. I told him about the box I'd hidden, about the watch I'd meant to give him, about every Christmas I had spent pretending I was fine. I told him I was proud of the man he'd become, even if it took me too long to say it out loud. When I finished, the page was spotted with coffee rings and the kind of tears that fall quietly. I folded it carefully, slid it inside the envelope, and stared at his address for a long time before writing it down. Outside, the road glistened with thin ice. I started my old truck. It coughed and groaned, as if reluctant to wake, but eventually the engine caught. The air inside smelled of cold metal and dust. I drove slowly, following the narrow path out of town, toward the post office. The tires crunched over the frozen snow, and with each mile, the weight in my chest eased just a little. At the corner where Martha's favorite bakery used to stand, I stopped at a red light. For a second, I imagined her sitting beside me, smiling the way she used to when Daniel sang along to carols in the back seat. I smiled too, though it hurt. When the light turned green, I whispered, "We're almost there." At the post office, I handed the letter to the clerk, who barely looked up. "Regular or express?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "Express." "It's late enough already." Back in the truck, I sat for a while before starting the engine. Outside, children were building a snowman, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. And in that moment, I realized that Christmas wasn't finished, it was only waiting for someone brave enough to begin it again. I touched the pocket of my coat where a copy of the letter still rested and whispered, "You'll read it soon, son." Then I drove home through the quiet streets, feeling, for the first time in years, not lost, but found. The letter was gone out of my hands, out there in the world, heading toward the man my boy had become. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, as if a weight I'd carried so long had finally decided to walk beside me instead of on my back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the cold, wind brushing against the windows like someone trying gently to come in. I sat by the fire until only embers glowed, then pulled on my coat and boots. I didn't know why, but something in me said to drive. To move. Maybe I wanted to see the old church again, the one where Martha and I had said our vows, where Daniel used to light candles for her after she passed. The truck started after a few stubborn tries. The headlights cut through the fog as I steered down the empty road. The town looked different under snow, cleaner, quieter, almost forgiving. Every turn carried ghosts, the gas station where Daniel learned to pump fuel, the park bench where we shared hot chocolate after sledding. All of them blurred behind me like pages of a book I'd read too many times. Halfway to the church, the snow thickened. It came fast, wild, the kind that erases the road. I slowed down, wipers beating back the storm, the radio whispering carols through static. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and for a moment I wondered if I should turn back. But the voice inside me, soft, stubborn, familiar, said, "Keep going." When I finally reached the small stone church, the parking lot was buried. I left the truck by the gate and walked through knee-deep snow, each step crunching like breaking glass. The bell tower loomed above, dark against the gray sky. Inside, the warmth hit me first, the faint scent of wax and cedar. A single candle burned near the altar, flickering as if waiting. I sat in the same pew where Martha once knelt, the wood cold beneath my hands. For a long time, I said nothing. Then the words came in a whisper. I sent him a letter, Martha. Maybe it's too late. Maybe it's not. Silence answered, yet somehow it felt like listening. Outside, the storm began to ease. I looked at the door, half expecting Daniel to walk through it the way he used to, cheeks red from the cold. He didn't, but something told me he would. I stayed there, watching the candle burn lower, waiting for the snow to stop and for a sign that forgiveness was somewhere on that road I'd just driven. I don't know how long I stayed in that church. The candle kept shrinking, a slow golden tear running down its side, and the silence wrapped itself around me like an old blanket. I thought I was alone until I heard the faint creak of the door. Cold air rushed in, and with it, footsteps. When I turned, I saw him, Daniel, standing in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders, his face half shadowed by the light. For a heartbeat, I thought I was dreaming. He held something in his hand, a letter, already opened and wrinkled. "Dad," he said softly. Just that. One word, small but full of everything we hadn't said for years. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, and he walked toward me, his boots leaving wet prints on the stone floor. He sat down beside me in the pew, the space between us smaller than it had been in decades. For a while, neither of us looked at the other. The candle flickered between us like a fragile heartbeat. He finally spoke. "I read your letter. Every word." His voice trembled. "I didn't know you kept that watch. I didn't know about the tie either. Mom used to tell me you were better at feeling things than saying them. Guess I didn't inherit that." I smiled, barely. "Maybe you did," I said. "You just learned to hide it better." He looked down at his hands, then at the candle. "The car," he murmured, shame heavy in his tone. "That was stupid. I was trying to impress her dad. I wasn't thinking about what it would look like to you." I shook my head. "You don't owe me explanations, son. I missed you. That's all." He breathed out, a sound that was half sigh, half relief. Then, quietly, he said, "I missed you too." We sat there until the candle burned itself out, the last bit of light fading between us. But even in the dark, something bright stayed. I reached over and put a hand on his shoulder, hesitant at first, then firm. He didn't pull away. And in that moment, it felt like the years between us had finally exhaled. When we walked outside, the storm had stopped. The sky was clear, the stars sharp as glass. Daniel offered to drive me home, but I said, "Let's walk." The snow crunched beneath our boots, our breath turned to clouds that drifted together in the cold air. Halfway down the hill, he slipped his arm through mine, like he used to when he was little. The gesture was small, but it held the weight of everything that mattered. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Forgiveness had already found its road. And somewhere above us, the church bell rang once, soft, distant, and perfect. We walked for a long time that night, saying nothing. The snow crunched beneath our boots, the air sharp and clean, the kind that burns your lungs but clears your head. The moon hung low over the trees, silver on white, and every breath we took rose like smoke between us. It felt strange and familiar all at once, my son at my side again, our steps falling into the same rhythm, the silence finally gentle instead of cruel. At the bottom of the hill, Daniel stopped and looked toward the road where my truck waited, half buried in snow. "You sure you can still drive that thing?" he asked, smiling for real this time. I chuckled. "That old truck's been through worse. Besides, it still remembers the way home." He laughed softly, and the sound carried through the empty night like something being returned. We reached the truck, brushed off the snow, and climbed inside. The heater wheezed, the engine sputtered, but eventually warmth filled the cab. For a moment, we just sat there, watching our reflections tremble in the windshield. "Dad," he said after a while, "I was going to visit tomorrow. I wanted to surprise you." He glanced at the dashboard, at the small Christmas ornament Martha had once hung there. But then the letter came. I read it twice. I didn't even finish work. I just drove. I nodded, too full for words. Outside, snowflakes drifted against the glass like tiny hands tapping to be let in. We didn't go straight home. Instead, Daniel asked if we could stop by the lake, the one where he used to skate as a kid. The path was empty, the water frozen solid under the moonlight. We stood at the edge, our breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the stillness. He kicked a bit of snow, eyes shining. Mom used to bring cocoa in that blue thermos, remember? I remember, I said. She said it tasted better when it was shared. He smiled, nodding. I think she was right. For a long time, we just stood there, two shadows on the ice, hearing only the whisper of wind through the pines. And in that quiet, I realized that this simple moment was the gift I'd been waiting for all along. When we finally drove back, the road shimmered under the headlights, and the world felt wider, newer, as if forgiveness itself had opened the way. When we reached my house, the porch light was still on, glowing like it had been waiting for us. I killed the engine, and for a moment neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy with everything we'd finally said, and everything we still didn't need to. Then Daniel opened the door, stepped out, and helped me with my coat, the way I used to help him when he was small. Inside, the fire had long died out, but the warmth of our walk clung to us. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights blinking softly. Daniel looked around the room, taking it in as if seeing it for the first time in years. You kept everything the same, he said quietly. Some things, I replied, don't know how to change. He walked toward the mantel where Martha's picture sat, his fingertips brushing the frame. She'd be happy, he murmured. About tonight. About us. I swallowed hard. Maybe she had a hand in it. He turned then, holding something out to me, my own tie, the one he'd given me on Christmas Eve. I think this belongs to you again, he said. I didn't realize what it meant. I just grabbed something before we left the house. I thought I was being clever. But you'd kept it all those years. I took it from him slowly. The fabric felt different now, lighter somehow. No, I said, smiling faintly. Keep it. You gave it to me once, and I gave it back by mistake. Maybe it should stay with you until you understand it. He looked confused, then nodded, a soft smile breaking through. Fair enough. We sat down, both of us quiet, the clock ticking softly between words. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and placed a small box on the table. I was going to save this for tomorrow, he said, but I think now's right. Inside was a set of car keys, old but polished, with a tag that read to Dad. My breath caught. It's not new, he said quickly. It's the pickup from my shop. I fixed it up myself. It's nothing fancy, but it'll get you through the snow. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. You know, son, I said, you finally kept your promise. He grinned. Took me a while. We shared a quiet toast with coffee instead of wine, our mugs clinking softly. The house no longer felt empty, it felt alive again. Outside, snow began to fall once more, light, forgiving, endless. I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw not the man who'd left, but the boy who'd once written a note about walking in the snow. And in that moment, I knew that some gifts don't come wrapped in paper or tied with ribbons. They come late, but they come true. Morning crept in slowly, brushing light across the curtains like soft fingers. I woke to the smell of coffee and something frying in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming until I heard Daniel humming. The tune was faint, clumsy, but familiar. It was Martha's song. I sat up, wrapped in the old blanket that still smelled of pine and smoke, and listened. The house sounded alive again, the clink of dishes, the creak of floorboards, the quiet rhythm of someone who belonged there. When I stepped into the kitchen, Daniel looked up from the stove, spatula in hand, smiling. "You used to make this for me," he said. Figured it was my turn. He'd made eggs, toast, and bacon is simple, but it felt like a feast. We ate by the window, watching the snow drift lazily outside. Neither of us said much, and we didn't need to. The quiet between us was no longer heavy. It was peace. After breakfast, Daniel went outside to warm up the truck. I watched from the window as he brushed snow from the hood, his movements steady, patient. The old tie I'd given back hung loosely around his neck, fluttering in the cold air. For the first time in years, I didn't see distance between us. I saw connection thin but strong, like the thread of that tie. When he came back in, he handed me my coat. "Come on," he said. "I've got something to show you." We drove for a while in silence, the road cutting through fields of untouched snow. The world was so still it felt sacred. Eventually, he turned off onto a small road I hadn't seen before. It led to a clearing by the woods, where a new wooden bench sat facing the frozen lake. On it, carved neatly into the backrest, were the words, "For Mom." I couldn't speak. My throat closed around the emotion rising inside me. Daniel sat down beside me, brushing snow from the seat. "I built it last year," he said quietly. "I wanted a place where you could come, where we could both come. I should have told you sooner." The wind swept softly over the lake, carrying the faint echo of laughter, hers, or maybe just our memory of it. I put my hand on the wood, feeling the grain beneath my fingers, and for the first time since she died, the ache in my chest eased. Daniel leaned back, exhaling. "You know, Dad," he said, "I used to think Christmas was about giving the best gifts. Turns out it's about giving the right ones." I smiled, the cold biting at my cheeks. "You're right, son. And sometimes, the right gift isn't bought. It's forgiven." We stayed on that bench until the sun began to sink, turning the snow to gold. The world grew quiet again, no traffic, no voices, only the soft crack of ice far across the lake. Daniel brushed snow from his gloves, looked at me and said, "I used to come here when things got too loud. I'd sit and talk to her. I didn't know if you ever did the same." "I talked to her every day," I said. "Just not out loud." He smiled. "Then maybe it's time we both start saying things out loud." He stood and walked a few steps out onto the frozen shore, the wind lifting his scarf. I watched him, his shape against the fading light, the echo of the little boy who once skated here, fearless. For the first time I saw the man and the child together, one whole person. Pride and peace filled the space where regret used to live. We drove home as night folded over the town. Every house we passed glowed with warm windows and laughter. This time I didn't feel left outside. I was going home to something real. When we reached the porch, Daniel helped me carry in the groceries he'd picked up on the way. "I figured we could have one more dinner," he said. "Nothing fancy, just together." Inside, the lights of the tree shimmered softly. We cooked side by side, talking about nothing and everything, the kind of small talk that heals. When we finally sat down, he poured 2 mugs of coffee and raised his in a toast. "To Mom," he said. I lifted mine. "To second chances." The clock struck midnight. Snow tapped at the windows like a gentle reminder. The house was quiet again, but not empty, it breathed. I felt Martha there, in the glow of the lights, in Daniel's laughter, in the peace that had settled between us. Maybe that's what miracles really are, not thunder or angels, but the quiet return of love you thought was lost. After Daniel went to bed, I stayed up a while longer. I took the tie from the hook by the door and folded it neatly beside the old watch and the letter that had started it all. Outside, the sky was full of stars, clear and sharp. I opened the window and let the cold rush in, fresh and honest. Looking out over the snow, I whispered, "Merry Christmas, Martha." He came home. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt her answer, not in words, but in the soft stillness that filled the room, in the warmth that no fire could make. That night, as the lights flickered and faded, I finally understood what all those years had been trying to teach me. Christmas isn't about the gifts we open, it's about the hearts we open.